Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? I'm closer to the modem, so hopefully it's a little easier to hear me now, except for the raging washing machine in the background. Left all my mics at home, left my, lighting at home. It's amazing. It's amazing what's happened here. So I'm up at my parents' place in a town called, in a place called Manitoulin Island here in Canada. And hopefully the washing machine in the background doesn't sound like I'm in an airport, but who knows? Maybe it does. Maybe it does. Amazing. I am at my parents' place on the beautiful Lake Minnemoya, and it is Canadian Thanksgiving. And by Canadian, I mean it's just Thanksgiving here in Canada. It doesn't have to be modified to be Canadian Thanksgiving. Anyway, so, hey, welcome to Live Office Hours with Dr. Shannon Coates. That's me. What? And as I said, I'm coming to you live here from Manitoulin Island, which is the traditional lands, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Odawa peoples, recognized by the Manitoulin Island Treaties number 45 and 94. So these are these are treaties that, well, anyway, also on Manitoulin Island there's the largest unceded reserve in Canada is here on Manitoulin Island, Wikwemikong, and this is a place that, like I said, the largest unceded reserve, meaning the land that was reserved for the indigenous people here on Manitoulin Island originally was supposed to be the entire island, and then the government and the church got greedy, of course, and so the Wikwemikong was never, the indigenous folks in Wikwemikong never signed a treaty. So the land is still theirs. So it is the largest, as I said, unceded reserve or territory in Canada. So if you are in Canada, in Ontario, at some point the Wikwemikong powwow is incredibly powerful. So I can recommend that. That might be something to engage with. All right, Thanksgiving. I'm here in the beautiful lake, and I think now is the time to move into what we're going to talk about. So I'm here talking about I'm just realizing that I can't see comments. Gosh, let's see. Folks over on Facebook, I do not know whether this is actually happening. It says it is. It says it's happening, but I don't know. We'll see. Oh golly, it's good to be on really wacky Wi-Fi, isn't it? It's good to be on that. Oh, wacky Wi-Fi. Anyway, so what we're talking about today, just lean right in because I don't have a good space to do it. What we're talking about today, live office hours. Why breathe from the diaphragm doesn't bug me anymore. So here's what happened. 2 weeks ago, last week, sometime in the last little while, on the 27th of September, to be honest, to be absolutely clear, I was reading Dr. Karya Reagan's book, A Systematic Approach to Teaching Voice, A Systematic Approach to Voice. I cannot remember the exact name of the book because I don't have it with me because I left my house very quickly and forgot to bring a whole bunch of things, including, lights and mics and those kinds of things. Anywho, so that one of the sayings in that, one of the statements in that book kind of caught me off guard. I was reading it on the train, and so it kind of caught me off guard, and so I just posted it up on social media with some questions. And here's the thing. Here's the thing. There are a lot of terrific voice ped texts out there, and so far I have not found one voice ped text that I can recommend without a caveat. And that's okay, right? Like there are caveats to be had. I think there are reasons to read what we or to be critical about what we read and about what we, how we intake, and you should be critical of what I'm saying to you and how I say it, right? I when I talk about my courses to people, I include the caveats as I see them. So like there are caveats to all of them. This, however, Kari Reagan's book, Dr. Kari Reagan's book, is one book that has, in my opinion, very few caveats. So it is a book that I recommend constantly to folks, especially folks who are beginning teaching. I think it has a lot of terrific resources. I think the explanations of the physicality of the voice and the physiology of the voice, I think the explanations are terrific. I think that the exercises are terrific. I think that there's a lot from I often call it the workhorse of the voice studio, because I just think it's one of those books that you can be teaching and you can say, hold on a minute, I think what's happening is this, let me grab an exercise, and you can like grab it from the shelf and be like, bah, bah, bah. Oh yes, here's an exercise or a tool. So like I said, especially if you're a beginning teacher, I think it is a terrific resource and very few caveats. So all that to say, one sentence kind of stuck out for me from the book. You'll hear there are people in the background. Hey mom, I'm online just talking live, so just so you know. Because downstairs wasn't working. Okay. So here's the sentence that kind of pulled out and kind of hit me in the face a little bit. So the book is talking about the phrases breathe from the diaphragm and sing from the diaphragm, and just saying they are persistent misnomers among singing teachers. And that may or may not be true. Better. So that may or may not be true. And it felt like, a sweeping statement that didn't have, I was like, whoa, citation. And Dr. Reagan has also said, I didn't think there was a citation needed on that, and that's fair. That's fair. I felt like, well, that's a big sweeping statement. But the reason I felt like it was a big sweeping statement is because I hadn't heard a voice teacher say that in a very long time, So I was like, well, maybe people are still saying it, maybe they aren't. I don't know. And I mean, we're going to talk about today why I really don't care that much and why it doesn't bug me so much. But like the whole, the sweeping statement that this is a persistent misnomer, I mean, among singing teachers, I was like, okay, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but has anyone done a study? I don't know. So I posted that and I was like, I haven't heard this recently. Are people still using it? Maybe the people who I hang around with, the voice teachers I hang around with, maybe they're self-selected to like understand that those statements may be a little bit problematic, and so they're not using them, and so maybe that's why I haven't heard it recently. Who knows? Maybe that's why. So, I put it up on my socials, and like I did a very rigorous study. Very rigorous. You're gonna be so interested. The first question that I put on my Instagram stories, so rigorous, was I am a singing teacher or voice educator, and they got to choose. Never use these phrases, sometimes use these phrases, often use these phrases, and always use these phrases. And I think I had something like 500 or 600 people who saw the study, this very rigorous study. But I'm not sure, I can't figure out how to tell how many people actually responded or whatever. I can't, it's Instagram. It's not me to do scientific rigorous studies. I don't know. And people could probably take it a million times. Who knows? Anyway, but here are the results. So 69% of respondents, however many that is, who knows, never use these phrases. 19% sometimes use these phrases, 7% often use these phrases, and 5% always use these phrases. And so that's interesting. The vast majority don't use these phrases. Of the respondents, and some do. I mean, 12% either often or always use these phrases. So that's a pretty low Ah, that's interesting. Pedro, I'm going to say maybe your name is. In my experience, the expansion of the ribs is the breathe from the diaphragm of right now. Ha ha ha, I hear it all the time. Right, yeah, expansion of the ribs can be one too, right? A kind of misnomer around our understanding of how breathing, and in particular, breathing for singing works, right? And then the other very rigorous question that I asked was, I'm a singer, voice educator, and the last time I heard this was recently, a while ago, a long time ago, and never. And so 41% of the respondents responded that they had heard these phrases recently. 37%, hopefully not just on my post, and 37% said it was a while ago, and 17% said it was a long time ago, and 5% said they'd never heard them used before in what I'm assuming is a singing, a singing educational experience, or from a voice educator. Again, very rigorous. this, this study, very rigorous. So that's interesting. Like 41% had heard it recently. I didn't ask who they'd heard it from, of course, but that is, that just those numbers interesting to me. And the comments, I know, it's so interesting. Hey, Liz, I don't know. And the comments on the posts, though, were really the things that I found very interesting. The comment on those posts were overwhelmingly about, yes, I hear it from my students all the time. I never use those phrases, but I hear it from my students all the time because choral directors and music directors, people who don't know, right? So uneducated folks, people who don't know. So I hear it all the time from the choral directors and the music directors who aren't as educated in voice ped, or who don't have as much voice ped experience. So that's where my students hear it from. Or, interestingly, there was also a thread talking about how folks think that their students hear it, or they have noticed it a lot on like social media platforms from, young influencers, or not even young, I don't know, from influencers in especially contemporary voice, right? So popular music's influencers, voice experts in popular musics who are talking about, breathe from the diaphragm, et cetera, et cetera. My very cute mom just walked by. I don't know if you noticed that or not. There's this, so the overwhelming kind of response in my, just again, I think people hear from their grammar school teachers too, as little kids. Yes, exactly, right? So they've heard it in a classroom setting from music educators, choral directors, in music directors in the shows they're doing, and then also from this like TikTok was mostly blamed from the TikTok folks. Hey mom, my friend Liz says hi. Shannon's very cute mom. Yeah. Oh gosh, the there she goes again. The professionalism, right? I'm so professional, so professional. So that was the sort of stream. Was like there's these. Yes, this is no. It's not happening anymore in the voice teacher community. Of course, it's not happening anymore in the voice teaching community, with a few outliers. And then it is still being heard from singers, but especially from the singers who are coming in fresh to the studio or new to the studio, because they heard it from their classroom voice educator, they heard it from their choral director, they heard it from their music director, or they heard it from a TikToker. So there's this sort of really just interesting kind of dynamic happening in the comments, where voice teachers were saying, no, we don't do this. Of course we don't. We don't do these, But these bad guys do. These uneducated bad guys, they do it. All of these choral directors, man, they don't know anything. They're terrible. They do it. Obviously not everyone was saying it that way, but there was this kind of little undercurrent of, we're so educated as voice teachers, and so of course we know that we're not, so of course we're not going to use those phrases, but these other guys, they don't know what they're doing, and like they're really messing people up. So which is part of the reason I wanted to do this live, right? So I have had lots and lots of, I've had lots and lots of voice training and all that stuff, and voice fed training, of course. And when I'm teaching voice pedagogy, when I'm teaching my undergrad voice ped class, when we talk about breathing, we talk about, and when we talk about breathing for singing, we absolutely do talk about the phrases breathe from the diaphragm and support from the diaphragm and breath support and expand your ribs and lots all of these sort of stock phrases that we've heard and that do get used regularly, right? So we talk about those phrases, and I'll tell you what, the main thing in voice pedagogy, like when we're talking about these phrases, I'm not talking about them. I hope I am not communicating to the singers and voice teachers who I work with. I hope I'm not communicating that you're an uneducated, um, you know, person who is harming students if you're using the phrases such as breathe from the diaphragm, etc. Breath support is not my favorite. Not my favorite. I've done lots of lives on that as well. Maybe not lots. I've done a few lives on like phrases like breath support, and because I hope I'm not communicating that. Because here's the thing: there are no good phrases to describe or give. There are no absolute good is not what I mean. There are no absolutely effective for all the people phrases to describe or to give a directive around how another person should breathe in order to get the tonal outcomes that they're looking for in their singing. There is no one size fits all directive. So as we're studying breathing for singing, and I have particular issues with studying breathing for singing, and again, I try to communicate this when I'm working with voice teachers and singers as well. My particular issue around breathing for singing, around studying breathing, is that the more we understand how breathing can look and how it can work, the more we tend to like focus on it as we're teaching, right? So we tend to focus on, oh, you've got to do this, you've got to do X, Y, Z, you've got to do this, this, and this. And the issue in so many cases is the more we focus on how we should be breathing and on changing the breathing process for singing, the less effective the breathing may get or be. Why? Because that's not a great way for us to learn a physiological process, A, and B, because breathing is so totally individual. It is so individual. The muscles that I might engage in a particular way in order to in order to create a particular tonal outcome are going to be different and look different in my body and feel different in my body than the way that everyone else in the world coordinates in order to do a similar tonal outcome. We're never going to have the same tonal outcome, but to do a similar tonal outcome. So the way that breathe from the diaphragm lands for you may actually be really effective. It may actually work really well for you, for a singer, right? And when we've got choral directors who are, I feel especially for choral directors, right? Who, and lots of choral directors saying like, wow, we need more information, right? We don't want to be using phrases that are going to harm students. Obviously not, right? Like we're not trying to harm singers, and we don't want to use, obviously no one is trying to harm singers. So I hope. So I always feel for choral directors, because choral directors are trying to find the most effective directive that is going to work for like 50 people at a time. Y'all, there's no directive that is going to work or be effective for 50 people at a time. Like, as you're standing in front of a choir and giving a directive, there's nothing that's going to be effective for all of those people at the same time. There just isn't. That is what happens for us in the voice studio. We have one-on-one, so we can really tailor things to who we're talking to and what their individual needs are. Choral directors, that's not what they're doing. That's not their jam, That's also not the jam of a classroom educator. They're not there to like do one-on-one, right? Liz nodding. Yeah, right, they're not there for that. So yes, could choral directors, music directors, TikTok influencers, all of our folks, could everyone use a little more voice pet education. Of course, I feel like that. Of course, everyone could. We all could. We could all use a little bit more information. Honestly, the more I read about breathing, the more I'm like, oh, geez, there's a lot to learn here. And the more I work on, somatic voice work, and the more I work with not somatic voice work, Gina Lovitri stuff, but somatic influenced body work around voice and breathing, the more I'm like, yeah, there's a lot there still, isn't there? Because what we read in the textbook is about breathing to live. It's about, so I don't know anything about names if it's positive and no names if it's negative. Yeah, so like the breathing process that we see in the textbook. So, for example, Melissa Maldiz et al.'s text, What Every Singer Needs to Know About the Body. There's a lot in there about what the specific muscles do, what support might feel like, why breathe from the diaphragm is not a useful or may not be useful, etc. Oh, it's a compliment. Awesome. So then, unless you have a choral director like Donald Brinegar, I do not know how to say that name. I'm so sorry, and I don't know who that is. But yes, there are terrific choral directors out there. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely. And folks who are killing it, right? Like, absolutely. So, read his books. Terrific. Thank you. I will take a look. So, oh gosh, I got distracted. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. There are textbooks out there that have beautiful, in-depth descriptions around breathing for singing, and that tend to give a very useful description of why a phrase like breathe from the diaphragm may be problematic, right? So but those things, reading about the thing, as we have said, gives you the information, but it doesn't give you the way to apply it. And so if someone comes into the voice studio who's singing in a way that seems to be effective and seems to be doing what they want to do, and you say, okay, what's working for you? And they say, well, I really feel like I'm breathing from my diaphragm. You can say, okay, cool, I'm glad that directive seems to be really working for you. That's so interesting. Let's just go through a little bit of like what that means for you in your body. Let's break that down a little bit. When you inhale, what do you feel? What's moving? And if they say, oh, my diaphragm is moving, you can say, well, in fact, that's fantastic that you feel like your diaphragm is moving. In fact, we don't have an internal sense of the diaphragm. It's not actually, sensible. So what else do you think you might be feeling moving? What else do you feel? Let's take a look at this diagram. What else do you think might be moving? Are there other things you can feel in there? What are the colors of the movement? What is the texture of the movement? What is happening in there? So then we start to, rather than tearing down and rather than like saying, oh gosh, whoever told you that was really uneducated, rather than tearing down, we say like, oh, that's awesome and that's working for you. Let's figure out what is working, what actually is happening, right? And then if something isn't working for a singer, and your first instinct is to say, okay, you need to breathe from the diaphragm, you need to support more, or you need to expand your ribs, or you need to do any of these things that are directives that can be useful, think to yourself, what is it that I'm really reacting to? Why do I want to say the thing? So very often when we're like, okay, you need to breathe more from the diaphragm, what we mean may be something like, there isn't enough adduction at the vocal fold level, and so I need a little bit more, what's that called? Subglottal pressure. I need a little bit more pressure. I need to encourage a little bit more adduction at the vocal fold level so that I can create a more robust sound, perhaps. And my first instinct is to say, okay, breathe from the diaphragm or support more, or engage the support, or engage. But really what I'm asking for is I want that breath to have a little bit more pressure, and or I want the to be having a little bit more adduction. I want them to be, because I'm hearing that the sound is out of the body, or I'm hearing that the sound is like weaker or thinner, right? So that, exactly, Liz Areno asking my favorite question, which is her favorite question, which I learned from Liz. So that, exactly. So what am I really asking for? What do I really want? And so that then, then brings you to other directives that may be a little bit more useful. My main issue with breathe from the diaphragm and support and all of those phrases aren't necessarily that they're bad, or that they're bad physiology, or that they're wrong physiology, or that they're not possible, or that, you know, they're going to harm singers because they're mismapping things. It isn't necessarily that. It's that there's better ways to ask for what you want. That's my main issue. It isn't that they're bad necessarily, right? It's just that there are better ways to ask. So when you're saying, when your instinct is to say, and I'm saying this for, you know, choral directors, but when your instinct, or when you're in the voice studio and you hear someone say, oh, well, I know I need to breathe from the diaphragm better, I know I need to support more. You know, like when you hear someone say, what is the thing that the other person who said that to them, what was the thing that they were actually asking for? What was the thing they were hearing or sensing that was that asked them then to say that thing? What is it? Go a little deeper. Figure out what is it that I'm actually hearing in the sound? Is the sound weaker? Is it thinner? Is it under pitch? Does it sound squeezed? Sometimes we feel like, oh, there's a really squeezed sound, or it's pressurized maybe. You know, like all of these descriptors that we're using for the tonal outcome, backtrack that a little bit, and rather than saying, I want to see you breathe from the diaphragm more, or rather than, you know, saying maybe, you know, support more or whatever it is, backtrack that a little bit and say, like, in your own mind, say like, what's a directive that is going to allow for that release, or that is going to make the folds, it's going to result in more adduction, or it's going to result in a richer sound? Is it actually breathing from the diaphragm? Maybe it's something different. So this has been a little bit of a like jumble of thoughts. I want to just kind of come back to something I was saying at the beginning as well, is the more we focus on the granular and on the muscular physiological process, so the more we focus on don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place to focus on the physiological process of singing. There's a time and a place to talk about the granular, if you will, of the singing process and what the muscles are doing and what the physiology is. There's absolutely a time and a place to do that. However, I think we get overly focused on that, especially when we're trying to be great teachers, and especially when we've learned something for the first time too, right? So we can get a little overly focused on that granular, on the like, okay, so your ribs aren't swinging out enough, or that doesn't look the way that it should in the body, or maybe you're not using XYZ. So the more we get focused on that granular physiological process, the less, in some cases, the less effective it is, the less effective the learning is. So finding the coordination, finding ways to make the sound we're looking to make, finding ways to do the coordination and create coordinations we want to create through mimicry, through gesture, through listening and singing, through, which I guess is mimicry, through, you know, a characterization, through emotional intent, through what do I want to say, all of these other ways of finding the coordination for the sound, and then asking what is happening in my body. That is going to be a more effective way to find the thing that is going to make you not want to say breathe from the diaphragm, or that is to find the thing that is going to change, to find the process that is going to be more effective than breathe from the diaphragm will be. Gosh, I think I said the right thing there. I don't know if I said it or not. I'm not sure if that was communicating very well or not. You're so welcome for that. Hopefully it's clear that what I mean is like the more we talk about the breathing process, especially if we're talking about the breathing process separate from phonation. So the more I talk about the breathing process as like, okay, this is what should be happening and this is what should be happening in the body. And also, by the way, every time we inhale, the diaphragm descends. So we're actually breathing with, the diaphragm you breathe from the diaphragm, or with the diaphragm every single time you inhale. It doesn't, it's not like you're not breathing with your diaphragm right now. It's not like you're not using, right? So like the more we talk about that specifically, the more we sort of divorce it from breathing from phonation, which then gets us into a whole bunch of trouble too, right? Because then we're working on breathing in our body, but if it's not connected to phonation, it doesn't have a reason to exist other than grounding and like focusing and like finding yourself in a different emotional state, which is all good. And those things may help you to be a better singer, a more effective singer for sure in the lesson, especially, but those aren't breathing for singing directives, right? Those are breathing for life directives. Those are breathing for grounding and focus and like finding your body and all that stuff. That's all good. But that's not breathing for singing. Because like the breathing for singing that the breathing that I might use to, find release in my body is not necessarily the breathing I'm going to use to sing. It may be the same, but anyway, okay, now I'm rambling, so I'm just going to like stop that. Main thing here. Just because we are more educated about the potential issues with a phrase like breathe from the diaphragm or support or et cetera, doesn't necessarily mean that we're using better directives or more effective directives, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that we're teaching breathing for singing in a more effective way than someone who is using those phrases. Are those phrases misnomers? Yes, but so are all of the other ones. It's not like we have terrific directives that are, unless you're doing some really deep somatic body work, we don't have terrific directives that are applicable to all of the people all the time. So yeah, are they kind of misnomers? Sure. But so is breathe deeply. That's a misnomer. So is like, drink in the air. Air is a gas. It doesn't function like a liquid. So like you can't drink in air. Even though it may feel like it may be a terrific directive, it may be very effective. Can't drink in air. Air expands in all directions at once. Gas doesn't function like a liquid. So like all of our breathing directives are misnomers to a certain extent. They're all models, as Ian Howell might say. It's all models. There's no model that is without its issues or without its caveat, So yes, is breathe from the diaphragm a misnomer? Sure. But so are all of the other ones. And the third thing I think is keep in mind that breathing looks different in every single body, every single style. Breathing for singing looks different in my body depending on what I'm trying to say, what emotion, what style I'm singing in, how I feel that day. Breathing for singing looks different in every single body. Are there some things that are associated with breathing that are going to get you perhaps not as functional in the singing, or perhaps not going to get you where you want to go in terms of tonal outcomes? Yeah, there are some things that are, not going to may not serve you well in your body and your breathing process, that may not serve you well as a singer. For sure there are. Of course there are. And at the same time, we all do it differently. Do-da, do-da. So for some people, breathe from the diaphragm is a terrific directive. Very effective. Okay. So all that to say, when you're teaching breathing for singing, when you're working on breathing for singing, see if you can not mention breathing for singing. See if you can not mention breathing at all. See if you can find a way to have a back directive. See if you can find a way to find the coordination first, and then ask the singer to tell you what it feels like, to tell you what is in their body. And then maybe they'll give you a, wow, that really felt like I was breathing differently. Amazing. Amazing. You know what's going to happen when the singer feels like they felt something different? They're going to remember it better. Yeah, the raise the soft palate worries me more than the breathing misnomers. Yeah, you know what? I'll say raise the soft palate. Again, yes and. I mean, yes, it's, here's what annoys me about any directive is when we as voice teachers use the directive as if there are never any caveats, as if this is the one thing that is going to work for all the people in all the situations, right? That's what annoys me. It annoys me. I don't mind so much when folks, use raise the soft palate. I mean, it is, we are understanding more and more that it is also a misnomer, right? Like, and often we are actually mismapping what it feels like when we say, oh yeah, I raised my soft palate. Often we're completely mismapping that. Like we're like, yeah, I raised my soft palate, when in fact you did like 3 other things, and the soft palate is still slightly low. So like, there is definitely a and vice versa, right? I heard a story recently, Caruso, I think. Oh gosh, now I can't remember who it was. I think Ian Howell, I think, talked about Caruso, talking about how he used nasality in his sound, and oh gosh, now I can't remember what the whole thing was, but it was proven like that he did the opposite of what he said he did, but he wouldn't let anybody, publish that information until it was dead, because he was like so committed to like, this is what I'm actually doing. Okay, right. So like, yeah, there's lots of research to show, to suggest that with so many of these things that we think we're doing, we're not actually doing what we think we're doing in so many cases, right? So, but again, like, if it's useful for some people, it might be useful. But again, my issue isn't necessarily with the raise the soft palate directive. It's with, like I said, as with all directives, it's with the surety with which we issue these directives, the black and whiteness of it, and also there are better ways to think about it, right? So like with raise the soft palate, when I have the feeling that I want to give a directive of raise the soft palate to someone, what am I actually asking for? Probably I'm hearing that the sound isn't as lofty as I would like it to be, right? It's not there's something missing from the resonance, and I'm feeling that like I want to have a little bit more openness perhaps in the back. I want to have a little, perhaps I'm asking for some more flow. I'm going to use these other phrases that again are all models and are all flawed anyway. So maybe I'm hearing that there's something missing in the tone quality. It doesn't have as much richness to it maybe as what I'm missing. So then what are some ways to find a richer tone quality that don't involve maybe raise the soft palate or other misnomers? Open the throat is also a misnomer. It's a sensation for sure. It can be a sensation or mapped to a sensation, but it's not necessarily what we're doing. All of the directives are misnomers to a certain extent. So I just get, I mean, I have sat in adjudications where I'm sitting at the back of the room and someone is talking to one of my students, wonderful teachers, and they're saying, oh yes, well you're getting this sound because you're not raising the soft palate. And I'm like, nope. No, that's not why. There's a nope, not at all. But then the student, raises their soft palate and gets the tonal outcome that they're looking for. Did they raise the soft palate? No, they did not. It was totally not related to that. So like, and then of course, my students come home into the studio, and then I'm like, but he thought that that was a very good directive and it was useful for you. Let's explore that a little bit more. Let's figure out what might also be happening here besides just now you learned how to breathe from your diaphragm. Maybe you did some other stuff too. Let's figure that out. Anyway, okay, now I have truly gone on long enough. Truly. So, in short, all directives are flawed. All models have caveats. The longer I live, the less I think that there's that anything is, that there are two sides to anything, right? My mom clearing her throat in the background there. Yeah. So, breathe through the diaphragm might work really well for some people. Might be, and also, you know what? It may be something that you have to unlearn. It may be. Do I want to be the teacher whose students have to unlearn things later in life? No, I don't. But you know what? I'm gonna be that teacher no matter what. We're all going to be that teacher. Your students are going to have to unlearn some things from you later in life. All of them will at some point. We're all going to be that teacher. We cannot not be that teacher. We cannot not be that parent, which I am learning, sadly. I wish I could be, but we cannot. No one can be that person, right? So you can't, there's no teacher out there from whom you are not going to have to unlearn something. It's just the way it is. That's just life, man. That's just our communication. That is just a human to human communication. That is like, I say a thing and you take it in a way that I didn't intend, and yet there we are. And or I say a thing and my words are not working for you, or I say a thing and I don't really understand it, and so then I give it to you and you put your own understanding on it. Whatever, that's human beings. We're never, your students will have to unlearn a thing, and if they have to unlearn breathe from the diaphragm, that's not a terrible thing to have to unlearn. They have to unlearn some other thing, that's not terrible. Okay, go forth. Use whatever directives seem useful. See if you can find a way to think through why you want to use a specific directive, especially if the directive seems to be a very like one-shot like response to a sort of like one-size-fits-all response to all the problems, right? So like if someone isn't singing the way they want to and you're like, yeah, that's because you need to raise your soft palate, and that's the thing that you're saying to all of your singers, the singers you work with, well, maybe you need to like figure that out a little bit. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's working for every single singer you work with. If it is, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. Maybe it is. All that to say, doesn't bug me so much at all when I know that there are people out there who are using the phrase, breathe from the diaphragm, especially choral directors. Choral directors get some extra special dispensation for just like, also, classroom educators get all the special dispensation. Are you going to have to unlearn some things from your classroom educator? Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you are. Of course you are.